co-host. Okay, how exciting. All right, so our goal here is to have the GitLab project, or at least a group at GitLab, start dog fooding reviewers. So after David submitted his MR to propose us doing that, Andre and I sat down and we went over so much feedback, and we categorized them and we outlined the different scenarios that people can use reviewers, what would be preferred, and all of that. So here's the summary of kind of what we decided based on that feedback. We're thinking, and Andre, you can jump in at any time to interrupt me, but this is the scenario that we're thinking people will adopt as an MVC. So number one, people who are responsible for the MR, like the authors, which could be multiple people, that's what the assignee field will be used for. People who are reviewing or have already given reviews, that includes maintainers, those are going to be in the reviewers list. You won't get removed from the reviewers list even after you submit the review unless you don't have time to do the review. So that's identified by the re-request review button, the approved icon. Basically, that list will give you context clues as to what the status of your review is. The one piece of feedback that kept coming up was like, when do we merge? We don't know that today, and we still don't know that. So Andre and I have like an FAQ on how you can determine that you need to merge. But the big thing, one of the main reasons for this call is that we'll have to distinguish between the MRs that have been reviewed or unreviewed. So reviewers know what their action to take is, that they need to take action. So that was the loudest amount of feedback. Andre, go ahead here.
Yeah, and that was the cause of people double using the assignees and the reviews at the same time, is because they couldn't really distinguish that scenario very easily with the current reviews. I just want to highlight another thing, another gap. Is that what you want me to cover? Yeah. So on top of distinguishing those two scenarios, the one thing that we heard as well is that right now, for you to be able to mark your review as complete, we are leveraging the merge request feature, the merge request review feature. But if you don't have any comments to add as on the code, you're just going to leave a regular comment, looks good to me, approving or something. You won't use the merge request review feature. So you won't be able to mark it as done unless you approve. That's another potential way of marking review as complete, which is approving. So that's another gap, but it's a minor one at that. The major one is the counter, give me a distinction between the ones that I'm set as a reviewer and the ones that I actually need to look at. So yeah, final
Andre,
question.
shouldn't they approve? If
Sorry,
it
what?
just looks good, shouldn't that be the process? If it says looks good to me, shouldn't they still be hitting approve?
The approve does not toggle the review status as completed. It's just the merge request review that's doing that at this point. But yes, they should. However, you can still, hey, rebase or something. You can still ask something, or the tests are not passing, and it's not actually something on the code. Right now, you have to leave a comment on the code to mark the review as completed, which seems a bit incomplete.
I see. Did you find that? Because I didn't see that in the feedback.
That's out of the whole leveraging the re-request review button to mark the review as completed. It came up on the exploration. Yeah.
Okay. So my big question is, does this proposal align with the vision of reviewers? And then, of course, as a piggyback, Phil's MR works towards solving this. We can solve it in a different way too, but what are y'all's thoughts?
Yes to vision. I think yes to vision. I guess we can start there. Phil's MR is a different question. It feels outside of this scope for me. And one of the things that's actually sort of concerning is that we might linchpin to that. in general.
We might what? Sorry, Kai, I didn't understand.
Like tie ourselves to that flow. I think one of the things that we were concerned about, or that I was concerned about when we introduced the re-request review feature in general, was that it was tied to batch comments. Tying the whether or not I have done anything on the MR to batch comments is like furthering us down this like hole that I don't know that that is the path we want. I don't know that that's the workflow we want to force everything into all the time. Like we need different ways to deal with that and signal that. And so I'm concerned that if we tell people that this is the flow today, that like we need you to use batch comments for everything, that like that's sort of not the right answer. Because this does like what's underpinned in the way you've outlined this, but not explicitly said, is that you have to use batch comments for everything. And if you don't, like the whole thing falls apart. The moment you like don't leave a comment with a batch comment, like the whole thing is broken.
Yeah. Pedro, before I go, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I also don't like us using batch comments. I already said that in the first merge request that introduced this. But yeah, it's already good that we can experiment with the re-request review feature. Yeah, I agree with Kai. We need something that is a first-class thing on its own and that doesn't rely on the batch comments. And maybe in the future, they come together somehow and we make the relationship much more automatic. But this is such an important part of the flow. And clearly people want to have control in their own different ways, that making things just automatic and invisible, I don't think it works very well. Yeah, that's what I want to say. You had a comment, Andre, below. I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, just that noting that MR, what it really introduced is the state of a review. I think that's the crucial part of it. The fact that it's tied to batch comments, it doesn't have to be just the batch comments. I think the novelty there was we now have a state on the review. And moreover, one of the feedback that we got from people is that they want to still be able to go quickly to the merge request they are currently reviewing, in the process of reviewing, or attached as a reviewer. So the removing of the reviewers, as they did the assignees, doesn't cover that need from some people to be able to cover that. So the direction of using the reviewers, the review state, definitely makes sense to them as well. So I feel like it's an additional thing. We can support the review state in more places. The filter, which is the proposal, but I know that there's some things that be ironed out there. I don't think we're there yet. We can use a filter to work on the review state, but also we can add more ways to interact with that state, whether it's a manual toggle for the user. Like if I'm a reviewer, I must set I can see a button that only I see for my review, and I can toggle it, whether it's on, and this is where we need some guidance from you, Pedro, is it on the comment box? Is it on the reviewers list? Where is it? So that's where we don't really know.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the point is I would say we were not prepared as like, and I say we, product and design were not prepared to like have that conversation about handoff, right? And like it's great that it was contributed, and like I think the feature's fine, and we figured out like a happy spot, but that doesn't mean that like we want to be tied necessarily to that workflow, right? Like we did that entire long list of sort of thoughts and proposals that were about handoff and how we do that, right? There was that big long issue so that we could go and do the work to figure out what that experience was. And you're right, like that introduced state, but we need to answer sort of all the other questions about how to handle state as like a first class feature inside of the merge request. And I think that's the piece that like we're probably not prepared to have. But I guess my point is like I'm sort of concerned that we want to tie state to this proposal, and I say that for sort of two things. I'm mindful of the fact, and there's a really good comment in the doc that you and Michelle put together. That's like, we don't want to tell people to do it one way today and then do it differently in the future. I'd also say that it's not bad to tell them to do it one way today and differently in the future. That's sort of, no matter what, it's going to change. And I think like, I had sort of thought that like, and why I appreciated David's original proposal was like, it was very simply a drop and replace of the way we used assignees. It's like, hey, as you add and remove people to assignees to tell them that they need to go review it, instead of adding them to that field, add and remove them to the reviewers field. And that was sort of like the extent of the proposal, which got people using reviewers in a way that like, maybe some people would see re-request, maybe some people would see approved as we added those, right? Like maybe people would like understand these other pieces. We'd get more testing on the filters. We'd know like, what are the other combinations? We'd know what people want to see, what they don't want to see. And we'd get sort of like good feedback. And instead it feels like we want to have like the fully baked 100% done solution, which is like not the like sort of iterative step to get there. And I guess that's sort of what concerns me right now, is that like, it feels like we're like, oh, well, we need one more feature, one more feature, one more feature, which was the same thing that happened to even get reviewers shipped out the door. Was it was always like one more feature, one more feature, one more feature. And now we're still saying we need one more feature, one more feature, one more feature to get people to even use it. And so that's probably where I'm most concerned right now. Is I think we're trying to be more than the feature is today. And we should just be really honest with what it is today. Today it is a very simple replacement for assignees that sort of gives you an explicit role, but it's very much an assignee field.
So yeah, so I think I have, maybe it's a dumb question, but why? I mean, the vision is of course for people to stay as reviewers, and up until reviewers, they were added and removed when the ball was on someone's court. Why don't we, until we figure out a better way to handle exactly where the ball is, why don't people just add and remove themselves from the reviewers field?
Almost half of the feedback on that, the main pushback on David's proposal, was because the reviewers count in the nav bar never decreases. So they have a hard time understanding where their review status is. Do they still need to review it? Have they already reviewed it? Or are they waiting on feedback from the author?
If they remove themselves, it goes away. Like it would, if you treat it just like assignees, where the reviewer gets added to it and then they take themselves off when they're done. If we treat it just like that, the count goes up and down exactly the same as it did before.
Then you roll into one of the second biggest concerns, which is what is assignee for and why aren't we using it?
And also it loses the ability to see who's currently reviewing it. Because now you have a blend of assignees. Sorry, no, you don't have the blend. You have a blend if you use the same field. Never mind. You lose the ability to see the status of the other reviews, because now you've reviewed, the UX has reviewed but has removed themselves from reviewers. So you don't know if the UX has been, well, you have to check the system notes and everything.
We didn't have that before, right?
Right. So it goes back exactly to where we were, which brings the question that a lot of people brought: why don't we just use assignees in the first place?
I mean, you have now the split, and you can see, like, if you're a reviewer of some merge requests and you're an author or an assignee of another, you have that distinction, and you can filter down. For example, one of the things that we do today in our code review practice is prioritize merge request reviews over your own merge requests. So that's an easy way for you to see, hey, these are the merge requests I need to review. Whereas before, you were a nice assignee of everything, your own and your others' merge requests, and you didn't know what you should prioritize. So if anything, that helps with that triage. It doesn't help with much more because, as Kai said, we haven't had time to flesh everything out. But I think the re-request review button is an interesting feature. The saying if someone is approved or not is also an interesting feature, but they are solving problems. They're not solving the biggest problem. Basically, the biggest problem is knowing what you need to, if you have reviewed something or not, and that's something that we haven't addressed today. So given that we don't have that, I don't know. And as I said, maybe it's a dumb thing that people have already thought about, but why don't we just use the reviewers like the assignees?
So that was essentially the proposal, but if you click on the linked doc and you go to the feedback themes, you'll see where all the push on that. And I just don't see that that's merging without like a lot of effort towards it. I understand the MR handoff kind of conversation, pretty much everything that you just said, Kai, but I'm not sure that that's really like MVC. I think if we just show a way for them to, even if it's got the gaps, Andre, if we just show a way for them to kind of say like, this is what I still need to review versus this is what I have reviewed in whatever form that takes. And it can be a very simple form. I think that that will just satisfy it. I don't think we have to go into like, you know, only batch comments work. I think those are all things that we can still work with. But the pushback on the original proposal replacing assignees was like, you can see the number one feedback theme was we should keep the current process. Like that's what kept coming up was they would say we should keep the current process. They should say if we're going to update it, then we should update it to say not to use reviewers. Like all of the feedback was very much like, we're just not even going to look at this feature unless you can do this for us, which was a little unfair, but that's kind of what the feedback themes were.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be in the one more feature game to turn to like get people using this. Like I'm not interested in that. And I'd honestly say that like this isn't like, this feels like take my ball and go home kind of, but like if our team doesn't want to, like if GitLab as an org doesn't want to use it, then like I sort of don't care, and then like we'll keep doing what we want to do then. Like I'm not gonna fight our engineering team to do this. I don't think, like I just don't think that's worth our effort right now. If they don't want to use it in the state that it is because they have a system to deal with this, then like I'd rather sort of ignore this, I think. And focus on, I guess, like our customers and the problems there. And I say that because like our engineers have a lot of power here, and like I think that's fine, but that makes it very hard for us to like live this dogfooding and iteration value. And so like I don't want to take another fight on this. Like code reviews had to take a lot of fights on this, and I sort of don't want to take this one.
Don't you think that this
people, like saying that like this doesn't solve anything is sort of apparent because of our incredible investment in reviewer roulette, and I would say that like is also immensely frustrating. I imagine if we took reviewer roulette away as part of this, which would be like the ultimate way I'd love to do this and make our engineers feel what our customers feel on a daily basis, they would feel very differently about this. And they're not feeling this pain because we solved it outside of the app. And so like, I'm not going to go fight them on this right now. Like, it's just not worth it to me.
My question was, don't you think that this spells feedback or just anticipates feedback that we're going to get from customers? Because they're probably struggling with the same things, except They don't have the reviewer roulette yet, but they're still being fed this feature of reviewers that they're probably struggling with as well, just like us.
I'd agree. And I think what I have seen in the handful of customers that are on versions that support reviewers is they are using reviewers sort of very similar to how we use assignees. I've seen MRs of several customers over the last week and a half that have people in the reviewers field and have someone in the assignees field. And that is their process for signaling, because they very logically adapt it. And I think this is sort of what's frustrating. They very logically said, this person is a reviewer. I will make them their reviewer. And then they all like, I think that word is very easy to understand, tells you what that person is doing. It makes a lot of sense to put that person there. And they did that, and they just like, they're fine with that. Right? Like, that's a very easy way to go about it. And so I don't know what like the hang up is with our engineers on this, but like I don't know.
It's the added value of using it this way is very slim to justify using a different field. I think that's what they see a new feature, and then they go, right, there's a new use flow, a new use case here.
I mean, that is the quintessential MVC. There is marginal value increase. There is a value increase. We now can explicitly tell you what that person's role was in the merge request. So we have a value increase, right? And it is the smallest possible change we could get you to make that value change. That value increase was change your process. Instead of putting a reviewer in as an assignee, put them as a reviewer. You want to add and remove all day long, add and remove all day long. I don't care. But like, that should be very, very simple to do. And so much pushback on that is just not, to me, it is not worth it.
Right. So that scenario, as we identified, has the downside of not distinguishing the merge requests that I have reviewed and the ones that I have not reviewed. So basically, I just know the ones that I'm currently reviewing on. I have the assigned.
Same thing
I have
that exists today.
Right, as the assignees. And it won't give me, right, the merge requests I reviewed. The one thing that we also saw is that the commented column that we have on the approval rules widget, it's really invisible. Nobody knows about it. And so the thing about of us like, hey, if you want to know who already commented on, go and check the commented column on the approval rules. Nobody knows about it. So it's really not a solution for this missing information. But I get your point. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I think I'm with Kai that I agree that it's shipping minimal value, and the value is there, even if it's very slim. And I mean, if there's so much pushback, and most don't want to use it, I mean, it's okay if we don't use it for a couple of milestones, because to be honest, I think, at least to me, we already learned exactly what we need to focus on or not. So dogfooding it more could just be perpetuating some people's frustration. So I'm also okay with dropping that. And I think the focus here should definitely be on making this distinction between what I've reviewed and what is waiting on me to review. And that's why I think that we need a first last way to do it, but I just haven't had the time to focus on it. And I haven't reviewed Phil's MR yet, but we want to be very careful of introducing any kind of filter and something that magically occurs without something that you agree on, because there are so many different ways for people to work. And that's why we have the re-requests review button, and don't do it automatically when, like, we could have, when the author replies to a reviewer, we could automatically re-request a review from the reviewer, and we're not doing that. We have a button for it, and I think that is very explicit. So yeah, now we just have to focus on that, and a lot of this is from my part and not doing the whole vision for what reviewers should be. But it is what it is. We had so many things at the same time and so many priorities, it was difficult to focus on this.
So these are really good points, and phrasing them in that way reminds me of like how many very large customers source code and code review have who refuse to adopt our features until they meet a certain criteria. And they're not saying our features are not good. Code owners is a great example. Sectional code owners is a great example. Approval rules are a great example. Some of the compliance stuff is a great example. I have a lot of examples. They're not saying those features aren't good. They're simply saying, you know, I like where you're headed, but that doesn't meet what we have to do today. And so if you just do these few features. And so I think what I'm hearing, and Andre sanity check me, is let's try to go with this scenario. Maybe we explain it better and we have more information with it. This scenario that really David started out already. And if it's rejected, it's rejected and we understand. And maybe the only question that we'll need to answer then is like, well, when will we try to repropose it for dog fooding? But otherwise, like, it's no sweat off our back, really. It's just, we are our own large customer who is waiting on other things before it's adopted. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely sounds. It feels like it's the right now what the feature is able to deliver is this. We will continue to pursue improvements over the next couple of, like, I won't without promises, of course. We'll continue to pursue the maturity, making the feature more mature. But right now, at the current state, this is the process that we propose for efficiency, basically, because that's what we're talking about here, is making sure that everybody's follows the same process, has the required information to make them efficient reviewers. And if that is removing yourself from reviewer when you're done, then that's it. We propose that. We should also have a clear direction whether they should leverage the request to review or not. Because if you're left as a reviewer, that's not the expectation of everyone now if we propose this process. So we need to word it in a way that this is the process we recommend right now with the current state of the feature. We'll let you know soon if this changes. I think that's it.
I would just say, like, I don't at this point even have an expectation that you go back and try and put another proposal on the table. I am okay if we walk away and just say, we're willing to have this conversation again in several months, but we're not willing to have the conversation today. I think that's a perfectly acceptable answer. And I think, like, you're going to run into the same thing over and over again. And I appreciate that everyone's like, oh, look at this other thing I needed to do. Look at this other thing I needed to do. Like, and to Pedro's point, we got the, like, sort of some of the feedback we wanted about, like, what we need to go do. And we sort of knew we needed to go do those things. We thought we could get an interim step in there. It doesn't feel like we're going to. So, like, I'm fine if, so you and Michelle and anyone else doesn't have to spend the cycles and brain power and sort of, like, putting that up again just to go to relive that same merge request. Like, there's no value in reliving the same merge request. That's just going to end up in the same spot where, like, people are mad, right? So, like, I think it's fine to just say, we'll come back to this and we'll try again in several months when we feel better about it.
I think we probably still should, just because we do want to give some sort of like closure and update to this reviewer's feature. Like, one of the questions David asked me was, since this MR has closed, should I open up a new one that recommends not using it? And I said, no, we're not doing anything. We need to just close the loop on this and just kind of say, like, even if it's not even a required process, just kind of say, this is what we recommend. If you don't want to use it, that's okay. We're still continuing. We know the downsides. Here they are. You know, we have a vision. Here it is, and that's that. So I do think it's still worth doing that to kind of close the loop. But whether it's whether we push forward for the next 2 to 3 weeks to get it adopted, that's the difference.
Yeah, I can't stop to feel that there's a bit of a wasted potential here, that we're very close to delivering a far better workflow and we're stopping like 3 steps from it. Whether, and I'm not saying that this is the shape that the handoff is a crucial part of code review, and that's why we're exploring it carefully and deeply. But it feels like the harder part is done. The split of the entity of reviewer and assignees is the hardest part. Maybe I'm being naive. So that's why I was thinking about, yeah, this is what it allows now. That's the message that the process that we can deliver now and support. However, people will, like, the problems that they've already seen that could be potentially solved with the features we have today are there. Like it's going to be like, so why don't we use what we already have now and again, yeah, solve the bugs that we have or the gaps there. It feels like we're stopping short at a very final solution. But I agree with your part about not wanting to marry to one solution that we're not sure it's the right solution. I totally understand that too. So I fully, I just wanted to clear that out, but I also support the decision of making the process the one that is supported by the feature today. So I think we're all aligned there, presenting that to the team as a recommendation, like Michelle was saying.
Okay, we got to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Next steps, Andre and I can regroup and kind of solidify what the next steps are. So next steps is Andre and I will figure out next steps. And we so appreciate both of your feedbacks on that.
Yes.
We just did want to go a totally different way. And then we'll probably just give an update and see if you totally hate it. And if you don't, then we'll just continue on whatever our next steps are.
Yeah, I think we can commit to that. Before we send the process for the maintainers, that's the next thing in our workflow. We're going to propose the process to the maintainers to see if they have any blockers. We'll present it to you too first. Sounds good?
Thanks. Appreciate
Okay,
it.
thank
Thank you so much for working through this.
Always.